The winter of 1943 was a cruel one, even by the standards of war. The snow fell without mercy, blanketing Poland in a silence that was both beautiful and suffocating. Beneath the iron-gray sky, the land was scarred with the black smoke of burning villages, the distant thunder of artillery, and the quiet, pitiless rhythm of trains that never came back. In the shadow of Krakow, where the wind howled through barbed wire fences and the crows circled over frozen fields, there stood a small German transit camp, one of countless nameless outposts feeding the endless machine of the Reich. Inside its wooden barracks, humanity was stripped down to its bones. Prisoners huddled together for warmth, their breath visible in the cold air, their eyes dull with hunger and fear. The guards moved like wolves through the snow, their laughter harsh, their cigarettes glowing in the dark. And presiding over it all was Oberleutnant Friedrich Adler, a man the soldiers called the quiet officer, for he rarely raised his voice and his face was carved from stone. Friedrich was 37 years old, tall, with sharp features that looked as if they'd been chiseled by discipline itself. His uniform was immaculate, his boots polished until they reflected the snow beneath him. On his chest gleamed the Iron Cross, earned not for cruelty, but for efficiency, for obedience. Yet behind the mask of authority there was a hollowness that grew deeper with every passing day. He had once been a teacher before the war, in a quiet Bavarian town nestled among pine-covered hills. He had taught history, of all things, taught his students about empires and revolutions, about men who rose and fell, about honor and justice. He had believed, naively, that Germany's revival under Hitler would bring pride without corruption, order without cruelty. He had believed the propaganda, as many had, that their nation was reclaiming dignity stolen by defeat. But in the long, brutal years that followed, Friedrich had come to understand that the price of that dignity was measured in blood. Now each morning he woke before dawn, buttoned his tunic, and stepped into a world that defied the very lessons he had once taught. The air was bitter with the scent of coal and ash. The snow on the campgrounds was no longer white, it was gray with soot and trampled by boots, streaked with stains that refused to fade. The men under his command were young, arrogant, many drunk on ideology. They laughed too easily at cruelty. They found joy in power over the helpless. Friedrich did not laugh. He watched. He carried out his duties because not to do so would mean suspicion, and suspicion meant death. But with every order he signed, a weight grew in his chest. On one particular morning, he stood by the perimeter fence watching a new transport arrive from the Krakow ghetto. The train doors slid open and a tide of people spilled out, thin, shivering, eyes wide with terror. Among them were children, too many to count. Their coats were rags, their faces hollow. A little girl, no more than 8, clutched a doll missing an arm. A boy limped beside her, one shoe gone, his small hand gripping hers as though the act of holding on could stop the world from falling apart. "Move, schnell!" barked one of the guards, jabbing his rifle butt into the crowd. The prisoners stumbled forward, herded like cattle into lines. Friedrich stood motionless, the snow crunching faintly under his boots as he watched. A lieutenant beside him muttered, "Filthy vermin! The sooner they're cleared, the better." Friedrich said nothing. His eyes lingered on the girl with the doll. She looked up, her gaze meeting his. There was no hatred there, no defiance, only a wordless question, why? That night, Friedrich could not shake the memory of that look. It followed him into his quarters, into his dreams. He sat at his desk long after lights out, the lamplight flickering over the photograph of his wife, Elsa, and their young son, Klaus. In the picture, Klaus was smiling, gap-toothed, his small hand clutching a wooden airplane. He was 7, the same age as that boy from the train. The thought hit Friedrich like a bullet. He imagined his son standing in the snow, terrified, hungry, reaching for help that never came. His hands began to tremble. For months, he had buried his doubts beneath the armor of routine. But now the armor was cracking. He began to see ghosts in every face that passed him, reflections of what he had lost, what he had become. The words of the Führer meant nothing anymore. The speeches were hollow thunder. What did it mean to be a soldier if the orders turned you into a butcher? What was loyalty if it demanded you to abandon your soul? The next day, a new directive arrived from headquarters. A group of children from the previous transport, orphans mostly, were to be sent east for processing. The euphemism was clear. Friedrich signed the papers automatically, as he always did. But when he saw the names, Miriam, Jakob, Ruth, something in him broke. He crossed out the transfer codes and wrote new ones. He stamped the documents with his seal. The children were reassigned to local labor detail under his supervision. It was a small deception, easily overlooked, but it was enough to delay their fate. That afternoon, he watched as they were marched not toward the train yard, but toward the storage sheds. They didn't understand what had changed, only that they were still alive. The little girl with the doll turned her head and looked back at him once more. This time, she smiled. A small, uncertain smile, but a smile nonetheless. Friedrich felt his throat tighten. He turned away before anyone could see. From that moment, there was no turning back. He began to take risks, small ones at first, invisible to most. He redirected supply shipments to feed the children working in the sheds. He forged signatures to mark sick prisoners as fit for work, buying them time. He bribed guards with cigarettes to look the other way when roll call numbers didn't quite match. The lies multiplied, delicate as spider silk. Each one was a defiance whispered in the dark. At night, he would walk the perimeter under the moonlight, listening to the wind moaning through the wires. The snow reflected the faint glow of lanterns, and the stars above looked cold and distant, indifferent witnesses to the suffering below. Sometimes he would pause by the barracks, hearing the faint hum of lullabies sung by mothers trying to calm their children. The melodies were fragile things, almost broken, yet they persisted. They were, in their own way, a kind of rebellion too. Friedrich began to wonder when he had stopped believing in victory. Perhaps it was the day he saw a soldier shoot an old man for picking up a crust of bread. Perhaps it was when he watched a boy die in the mud, whispering his mother's name. Or perhaps it was that morning when a little girl's eyes stripped him of every excuse. Whatever the moment, he knew that the war was lost, not for Germany, but for his own soul, unless he found a way to redeem it. He started keeping notes in a small ledger, coded entries that only he could decipher. It was a record of those he had managed to save, however temporarily. He wrote their names carefully, as if writing them into memory could shield them from oblivion. Each name was a promise, a prayer. Each one was a refusal to forget. By late December, the snow had buried the camp roads in white silence again. Christmas came and went, uncelebrated. Friedrich received a letter from home. Elsa's handwriting shaky, Klaus's drawing of a snowman scrawled in the corner. "When will you come back, Papa?" the boy had written. "It's cold without you." Friedrich read the words over and over, his vision blurring. He wondered if his son would ever know what kind of man his father had become, what kind of man he was trying to be again. Outside, the camp slept under the frozen stars. The guards snored in their bunks. The prisoners dreamed of home, of warmth, of sunlight. And in his office, Oberleutnant Friedrich Adler sat in the half-light, staring at the fire dying in the stove. The flickering embers cast long shadows on the wall, shadows that looked like bars, like ghosts, like memories. He took a deep breath and whispered into the silence, "No more." The words were small, but they changed everything. From that night forward, Friedrich Adler, the quiet officer of the Reich, became something else. Not a soldier of Germany, not a servant of orders, but a man who had remembered, in the heart of winter, what it meant to be human. By the time the thaw began in early 1944, the ground had turned to mud thick as blood, swallowing boot prints and secrets alike. The harsh white of winter melted into the gray of spring, but the cold inside the camp remained, an endless, invisible frost that no sun could melt. The trains kept coming, their metal wheels screaming through the dawn, carrying more faces, more names, more ghosts. Friedrich Adler had become a man of two lives. By day, he was the disciplined officer, stern, efficient, precise. By night, he was something else entirely. A man walking a knife's edge, balancing between the Reich's authority and his own crumbling conscience. Each falsified paper, each whispered command, each forged signature was an act of defiance against the machine he served. And though his hands never shook when he stamped the ink, his heart trembled with the knowledge that discovery meant death. It began with one small act that became a chain of many. A mother and her son, both listed for transport east. He replaced their destination code, reclassified them as local laborers, and transferred them to the maintenance detail. A few weeks later, a group of orphans from Warsaw arrived. Friedrich marked them as farm apprentices, sending them to rural estates that existed only on paper. The SS clerks never noticed. Paperwork was sacred. The stamp made everything truth. But paper alone could not save lives. Friedrich needed places to hide them, safe hands, safe walls, safe silences. He found those hands in the most unlikely of places, a convent deep in the countryside, where the white habits of nuns had become shields for the hunted. The contact came through a Polish railway worker, a quiet man with eyes full of suspicion and courage. His sister, he said, was a nun named Sister Magdalena. She and her sisters were already sheltering Jewish children under false baptismal records. If Friedrich could get the children out of the camp, she would take them. It was madness, and Friedrich knew it. Yet when night fell, he took the risk. Their first meeting took place in the ruins of an old chapel outside the camp perimeter, where a bomb had shattered the stained glass and left the Virgin's face cracked with sorrow. The candlelight flickered between them, throwing their shadows high on the broken walls. "You're a Nazi officer," she said quietly, her Polish accent soft but cutting. "Why would you risk your life for them?" Friedrich looked down at his gloves. "Because I once taught children their worth," he replied, his voice heavy. "And now I am forced to watch them die. I can't live with that anymore." Sister Magdalena studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching for deceit. But what she saw there was not pride or performance, it was despair. She nodded once. "Then you will help me, and we will help them. But understand this, if you fail, we all die." "I understand," he said. "Then let us not fail." Over the next months, a quiet network took shape, a web of deception woven from trust and desperation. Friedrich arranged supply convoys that carried hidden passengers instead of crates. He bribed guards with cigarettes and vodka, assigning the most brutal among them to posts far from the gate on nights when wagons rolled out. At checkpoints, the soldiers saluted him without question. To them, he was still the loyal Oberleutnant Adler, the officer who never smiled and never hesitated. The first successful escape happened under a moonless sky. A wagon, its sides covered with tarpaulins, creaked down the muddy road toward Lipnica. Inside, beneath sacks of grain, 3 children lay hidden, clutching one another in silence. Sister Magdalena met them at the edge of the forest, her lantern low. Friedrich watched as she led them toward the convent's shadowed walls. The church bells tolled softly in the distance, marking midnight. When the echo faded, the children were gone, swallowed by safety. For the first time in years, Friedrich allowed himself to breathe. But the work was relentless. Every rescue demanded more lies, more forged reports, more nights without sleep. He began to carry a small revolver tucked beneath his coat, not for defense, but for the day he would be discovered. The war outside raged on. Radio broadcasts spoke of Allied landings, of bombings over Berlin, of betrayal everywhere. Fear tightened its grip on every soldier. Paranoia became the new currency. And in that paranoia, danger multiplied. It was during one inspection that the name Hauptsturmführer Keller first reached Friedrich's ears. An SS officer recently transferred from Lublin, known for his fanaticism and his talent for uncovering subversive elements. He was, they said, the kind of man who could smell guilt like a wolf scents blood. When word came that Keller would be visiting their camp, the officers stood straighter, their uniforms sharper. Friedrich's calm became his only armor. Keller arrived on a gray morning, his boots clicking sharply against the frozen ground. He was younger than Friedrich had expected, early 30s, with slicked black hair and eyes that gleamed with cruel intelligence. "Oberleutnant Adler," he said smoothly, extending a gloved hand. "I've read your records. Efficient, loyal. You've maintained order here despite difficult circumstances." "I serve as I was trained to serve," Friedrich answered, his tone measured. "Excellent," Keller said, smiling without warmth. "Efficiency is what separates us from the animals." That night, Friedrich burned the old falsified rosters in his stove. The flames hissed and crackled, the paper curling into ash. He watched them disintegrate with a strange, hollow calm. He had always known this day would come, the day when his carefully built facade would face the scrutiny of eyes too sharp to fool. But he also knew there was no turning back. Too many lives depended on him now. To stop would mean surrendering those children to death. To continue would mean walking straight into the fire. He poured himself a glass of vodka, staring at his reflection in the window, the face of a man trapped between two worlds. Outside, the snow began to fall again, thin and silent, dusting the camp like the shroud of a dying winter. Somewhere in the barracks, a child cried. Somewhere in the forest, a nun whispered a prayer. And in his office, Friedrich Adler, the quiet Nazi officer, made his decision. He would save as many as he could before the wolves closed in. The spring of 1944 turned to summer, but in the camp at Rodham, warmth meant nothing. The air hung heavy with the stench of oil, smoke, and despair. The fields around the wire fences bloomed with wildflowers, as if mocking the graves beneath them. The war was turning. Even the officers could feel it. The Allied bombers came almost nightly now, rumbling over the clouds like distant gods of thunder. The Reich was bleeding, but its cruelty, cornered and wounded, only grew more vicious. Friedrich Adler worked harder than ever, his face calm, his posture perfect, his eyes always careful. But beneath that polished exterior, every heartbeat was a calculation, every glance a measurement of risk. The children hidden in the convent now numbered more than 30. Each one had a false identity, a name crafted from pieces of destroyed documents and burned records. Sister Magdalena and her nuns had become experts in deception. They baptized Jewish children under names of dead villagers, teaching them prayers and hymns they barely understood. They had built a fortress of faith and lies, all balanced on one man's forged signatures. But danger was no longer distant. It had a name now: Keller. Hauptsturmführer Otto Keller had made the camp his personal project. He prowled through the barracks, inspecting everything with eyes like a vulture's. He questioned guards, scrutinized rosters, demanded explanations for every missing name and every anomaly in transport logs. Men who had worked under Adler for years now spoke in whispers, afraid to be seen too close to him. Fear had become the lingua franca of survival. One afternoon, as Adler reviewed the latest transfer documents in his office, Keller walked in unannounced. The man's boots clicked across the floor, echoing like a metronome of doom. He stopped in front of Adler's desk, gloved hands clasped behind his back. "You work too much, Oberleutnant," Keller said casually. "Always the diligent bureaucrat. Tell me, doesn't it ever tire you, counting Jews like livestock?" Adler's jaw tightened. "It is my duty to maintain order, nothing more." Keller smiled thinly. "Ah, yes. Duty. The word that makes monsters sleep soundly at night." The silence between them hung like a blade. Keller leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Still, I've noticed discrepancies. Small ones. Transfers that don't align with Berlin's latest directives. A few missing numbers here and there. Surely nothing intentional, of course." Adler's pulse quickened, but his face betrayed nothing. The chaos of war breeds mistakes. The paperwork is inconsistent from headquarters. "Indeed," Keller murmured. "Mistakes. That's what I thought. But tell me, do you know what I find most interesting, Adler?" He reached into his coat and dropped a folded piece of paper onto the desk. It was one of Adler's falsified manifests, charred at the edges, pulled from the stove before it fully burned. The ash clung to the ink like blood to a wound. "Someone found this in your quarters last week," Keller said softly. "One wonders why an officer would burn documents that are already official." The room went silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Each second fell like a hammer. Friedrich's mind raced, but his expression remained carved from ice. "I burn old drafts," he said evenly. "We're ordered to destroy obsolete paperwork. You know that as well as I." Keller watched him for a long moment, then smiled. "Of course. I am sure that's all it is." He straightened, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "Still, it's fascinating how mistakes seem to gather around you, Oberleutnant. Be careful. Berlin is watching." When he left, Friedrich sat in silence, his hands trembling for the first time in months. Keller knew something, perhaps not everything, but enough to sense the rot beneath the uniform. There were spies everywhere now. Even whispers could kill. Someone inside the camp had betrayed him. That night, Friedrich rode alone toward the convent, rain slashing through the trees. The forest was black and whispering, the road a river of mud. He arrived at the chapel soaked to the bone, his boots sinking into the wet earth. Sister Magdalena was waiting by the door, her face pale in the candlelight. "You came," she said quietly. "I was afraid you wouldn't." "I almost didn't," he answered, lowering his hood. "They're watching me. Keller suspects." Her eyes darkened. "Then it's over?" "No," he said. "It means we must move faster." Inside the chapel, the nuns had gathered the children in the crypt, 40 of them now, some barely old enough to speak. Their eyes widened at the sight of him, that strange German officer who never raised his voice. Friedrich knelt down beside them, his expression softening. "You will be safe," he whispered. "Soon you'll go farther south, into Hungary. There are people waiting who will take you across the border." A little girl reached out and touched the iron cross on his uniform. "Are you one of the good soldiers?" she asked. He froze. Then, with a trembling hand, he unclipped the medal and pressed it into her palm. "No," he said quietly, "but maybe I'm trying to be." At dawn, he returned to the camp, his uniform still damp. his mind sharp with dread. By midday, the hammer fell. The Gestapo arrived, 3 black cars, mud-splattered, their engines rumbling like growling beasts. Keller stood at their head, his expression calm, almost pleased. The men entered Friedrich's quarters, overturning drawers, pulling out ledgers, documents, typewriters. They found the forged stamps hidden beneath a floorboard, the final proof. When they dragged him out into the yard, the guards stood in silence. Some looked away, others stared, their faces blank masks of fear. Keller approached, lighting a cigarette. "Such a shame," he said. "A man of your discipline undone by sentiment." Friedrich didn't answer. His face was bruised, his lips bleeding, but his eyes, those calm gray eyes, never wavered. "Where are they?" Keller asked. "The children? The nuns? Tell me, and I'll see to it that your death is quick." Friedrich's mouth twitched into something like a smile. "They're beyond your reach." Keller's jaw tightened. "You think silence will save you?" "No," Friedrich said softly, "but it might save them." They took him away then, to the interrogation chamber beneath the administrative wing, a place of concrete walls and iron hooks, where the screams of the condemned were muffled by the hum of the generators. The cell was small, windowless, and damp. The air smelled of iron, mold, and sweat. The only light came from a single bulb that flickered as if afraid to stay awake. Friedrich Adler sat against the wall, his uniform torn, his wrists bound in steel cuffs that had already bitten deep into his flesh. Blood crusted around his mouth. His ribs ached with every breath, and yet his mind remained strangely calm. He had survived 3 days of interrogation, 3 days of pain measured in minutes, questions repeated with increasing fury. "Where are they? Who helped you? Where did you send the children?" The same voice again and again, smooth as glass, cruel as frost, Keller's voice. Friedrich had answered none of it. The first day, they beat him. The second, they starved him. The third, they brought in the files. The falsified rosters, the forged papers, the burned manifests pieced together from ash. They laid them before him like trophies. Keller stood beside the table, immaculate in his black uniform, his gloved hands folded neatly. "You were clever, Adler," Keller said, circling the table. "I'll grant you that. These forgeries are art. But art is useless when the artist is dead." Friedrich lifted his bruised face, his voice hoarse. "Then kill me. You have what you want." Keller leaned closer, his breath cold. "No. What I want are the children. I want the names of every accomplice, and I want to watch you give them to me." He straightened, signaling to the guards. The next hours blurred into pain and silence. The lash cracked, the questions came, the blood fell. But no matter how deep the wounds, no matter how long the beatings, Friedrich's answer never changed. When they left him alone at last, he lay still, his breathing shallow. Through the haze of agony, he thought of the children, the small faces hiding in the candlelight, the girl with his iron cross clenched in her hand. He thought of Magdalena's voice whispering, "If you fail, we all die." He had not failed. Not yet. Far from the camp, in the convent at Lipnica, Sister Magdalena stood in the chapel's nave, surrounded by the trembling children. Outside, the night howled with wind and gunfire. German trucks had been seen on the road hours earlier, too close, too soon. The war was collapsing, and with it, the last illusions of safety. The nuns worked quickly. They had prepared for this moment for months, sewing false papers into hems of clothes, packing food into hollowed-out Bibles. Magdalena gave each child a small token, a rosary, a prayer, a whisper of hope. When the first explosion echoed from the distance, she turned to the eldest boy, Samuel, barely 13 but brave beyond his years. "Remember," she said, "you keep to the forest paths, you do not stop. There will be partisans at the river. Tell them who sent you. Tell them Father Adler sent you." He nodded, eyes wet but steady. "What about you, sister?" "I will stay," she said softly. "Someone must remain to pray for you." She watched them leave one by one, 40 small figures vanishing into the night like ghosts. When the last door closed, the convent felt impossibly empty, its silence heavy with both grief and grace. Hours later, Keller's men arrived. They came with rifles, torches, and shouts, tearing through the chapel, overturning pews, dragging the nuns into the courtyard. Keller strode among them like a shadow in uniform, his face cold and gleaming in the firelight. "Where are they?" he demanded. "The children. Tell me, and I'll spare your lives." Sister Magdalena stood straight, her white habit torn by the wind. "You are too late," she said. Keller's jaw tightened. "You think God will save you?" "No," she said. "He already has." He raised his pistol, the shot cracking through the night. She fell without a sound. The torches flickered as if recoiling from the act, and for a moment even Keller hesitated. Then, expressionless, he turned and ordered the convent burned. Flames climbed the walls, devouring the crosses, the pews, the painted saints. But beneath the roar of fire, somewhere in the forest, children's footsteps echoed farther and farther away. In his cell, miles away, Friedrich felt the vibration of distant thunder through the concrete floor. He did not know of the fire or of Magdalena's death. He only knew that something in the world had ended. The guards returned at dawn, dragging him to the courtyard. The morning was cold, gray, and merciless. Keller stood waiting beside a small wooden post. "This is your last chance," Keller said quietly. "Tell me where they went." Friedrich's lips curled in a faint smile. "You'll never find them." Keller exhaled, almost disappointed. "Then you die as a traitor." Friedrich straightened his back. "No," he said, "as a teacher." Keller signaled the soldiers. 3 rifles rose. The courtyard fell silent, except for the crows circling overhead. Friedrich closed his eyes, and in that instant he saw the children again, running through the forest, free, their laughter mingling with the wind. He whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for them. The shots rang out. That night, Keller wrote his report. Oberleutnant Friedrich Adler, executed for treason and collaboration with enemy sympathizers. Case closed. He signed it with a flourish, filed it among thousands of others, and thought no more of it. But history would remember differently. Because 2 months later, when the Red Army swept through Rodham, they found the ruins of the convent. Ashes, bones, and beneath them a hidden cellar with children's names carved into the stone walls. And in a monastery near Krakow, 40 survivors were found, thin, sick, but alive. One of them, a little girl, still carried an iron cross on a string around her neck. When asked where she got it, she said only, "From the man who wasn't a monster."